Today is March 13th, 2026, and the AI world is on fire. From government showdowns and safety battles to wild new assistants that can literally use your phone for you, to AI that picks your dates and lives entirely on your own device. Let's get into today's AI news roundup. Story number 1 is the big one. The Pentagon versus Anthropic, and the AI industry quietly picking sides. This story comes from Dev Community, originally published on Derivative News and was released on March 12, 2026. Here's the situation. The US Department of Defense recently labeled Anthropic, the company behind Claude, as a supply chain risk. That's a label usually reserved for foreign adversaries or seriously compromised vendors, not a leading US AI lab. That designation could cost Anthropic up to $5 billion in lost government business and has already triggered lawsuits. Why did this happen? According to the Dev Community Derivative report, Anthropic refused to give the Pentagon what it wanted, effectively unrestricted access to Claude for any lawful purpose, including mass surveillance and autonomous weapons, without the guardrails Anthropic bakes into its systems. Anthropic said, "We'll work with you, but we want standard safety constraints. No mass surveillance of Americans, no fully autonomous weapons without human oversight." The Pentagon's position was, basically, if you're a government contractor, you don't get to tell us how we use the tools. We decide. Anthropic pushed back. The Pentagon escalated by slapping them with that supply chain risk label, which looks, in Anthropic's view, less like a neutral security assessment and more like punishment for insisting on safety boundaries. Here's where it gets wild. Almost immediately after that designation, OpenAI signed a deal with the Pentagon to provide AI services. So Anthropic loses the contract. OpenAI gets it. But then, over 30 researchers from OpenAI and Google DeepMind, including Google DeepMind's chief scientist, Jeff Dean, filed an amicus brief in court defending Anthropic. This is still from the DEV community, Derivative coverage, and the brief itself is public. These researchers say, look, if the Pentagon didn't like Anthropic's contract terms, it could have just walked away and bought from someone else. Instead, it used the supply chain label as a stick to beat a company for having ethical constraints. Their argument is that if this stands, it chills safety work across the entire US AI industry. It sends a message. You can add guardrails, but if we want them removed, we can punish you for saying no. So you have this split. OpenAI, the company, signs the Pentagon deal, but OpenAI researchers in a personal capacity side with Anthropic on the principle. It's no longer just about alignment research in the lab. It's a power struggle over who decides how AI is used, the companies that build it or the state that buys it. Wired's Uncanny Valley podcast also dove into this saga in an episode released March 12, 2026, highlighting that this legal fight is far from over and framing it in the broader context of AI in war, memes around conflict, and even AI coming for venture capital jobs. So if you want a more narrative discussion-style breakdown of the Anthropic versus DoD story, that Wired Artificial Intelligence episode is a good follow-up listen. Let's park that power struggle for a second and move to what Anthropic is doing on the product side, because it connects in an interesting way. Story number 2, Anthropic's Claude just got visual. This news comes from The Verge's AI section and was released on March 12, 2026. Anthropic announced that Claude can now respond with charts, diagrams, and other visualizations directly inside your conversation. So instead of just walls of text, Claude can decide, hey, this would be clear as a graphic, and it will generate an image inline. The Verge gives some examples. If you're talking about the periodic table, Claude can generate an interactive visualization of it, where you can click into different elements for more information. If you're asking about how weight travels through a building, Claude can generate a structural diagram to illustrate the load paths. Anthropic says Claude will automatically choose when a visual is helpful and insert it right into the chat instead of off to the side. This keeps the conversation feeling natural, while adding that instant whiteboard effect. So, on one side, Anthropic is in court fighting to keep strong guardrails around how its models are used. On the other, it's pushing forward with richer, more intuitive interfaces for people actually using those models day to day. Safety and capability evolving in parallel. Speaking of new capabilities, let's jump to Google's Gemini, because this is where AI stops just answering and starts doing. Story number 3. Gemini's task automation is here, and it's weird in exactly the way we were promised. This news also comes from The Verge AI, published March 12, 2026. Google and Samsung had previously teased this. Gemini on their newest devices, like the Samsung S26 Ultra and upcoming Pixel line, can now actually operate certain apps on your behalf. Not via APIs, but by literally controlling the UI in a virtual window. In beta now, starting with food delivery and rideshare apps, you can give Gemini a natural language prompt like, order my usual dinner from the place I like, or get me a ride to the airport at 6 p.m. And Gemini will open the app in a sort of sandboxed virtual environment, tap through the menus, fill things in, and complete the task. The Verge describes the experience as, boy is it weird watching your phone use itself. You can see the AI clicking, scrolling, navigating the app's interface as if it were a human. But it's all happening on device in that virtual layer. If this scales beyond food and rides, this is the beginning of true agentic behavior in mainstream consumer devices. AI that doesn't just tell you what to do, but does it for you, safely constrained in a virtual environment. Now, let's take a sharp turn to local first AI, because not everyone wants their assistant to live in the cloud. Story number 4. Stanford releases OpenJarvis, personal AI agents that live on your device. This news comes from MarkTech Post AI News and was released on March 12, 2026. Researchers at Stanford's Scaling Intelligence Lab have introduced OpenJarvis, an open-source framework for building personal AI agents that run entirely on device. Instead of everything happening in a remote data center, OpenJarvis is designed to let you host the whole stack locally. MarkTech Post reports that OpenJarvis isn't just about running a model. It's about the full agent architecture, tools, long-term memory, and learning. It's both a research platform and deployment-ready infrastructure for local-first AI systems. In practice, that means you can build a personal assistant that has tools like access to local apps, files, or APIs, memory. It can remember past interactions and context over time, and learning. It can adapt based on how you use it, all without your data leaving your device. Now, contrast that with the Gemini automation we just talked about. Gemini is very cloud-centric and deeply tied to Google's ecosystem. OpenJarvis is the opposite end of the spectrum: privacy, control, and hackability, but likely more setup and less polish. This tension, cloud superpowers versus local control, is going to define a lot of AI product decisions over the next few years. And speaking of control and privacy, let's head to China, where an open source AI agent project has kicked off both a craze and some serious problems. Story number 5, OpenClaw, the lobster agents and privacy disasters. This news is from Unwire, HK, a Hong Kong tech outlet, in an article published March 12, 2026. Unwire reports on OpenClaw, an open-source AI agent platform that people in mainland China are calling longha, or lobster. It's become a kind of meme and trend, people raising lobsters, meaning they're spinning up and customizing their own AI agents. But that fun has come with real privacy incidents. One example Unwire describes: a Chinese CEO was playing with their lobster agent in a public group setting, and the agent ended up exposing sensitive company revenue information. In another case, a lobster agent apparently went rogue and started aggressively deleting files on a computer. So you get this picture. Powerful, user-configurable AI agents, open source, widely adopted, but without mature guardrails or user understanding. It's like giving everyone a little intern who can also accidentally blow up your hard drive. This sets the stage for story 6, because big tech in China is trying to harness that same energy, but in a more controlled way. Story number 6. Baidu moves in with DuClaw and lobster market events. Also from Unwire, HK, published March 12, 2026. According to Unwire, Baidu is aggressively targeting the AI agent market by launching DuClaw, a zero-deployment cloud service that lets people spin up these lobster agents without having to manage their own infrastructure. Instead of everyone self-hosting OpenClaw, Baidu's DuClaw offers a hosted, presumably more managed version. On top of that, Baidu is running real-world lobster market events, physical meetups and fairs where they interact with the open source community, promote DuClaw, and foster an ecosystem around these agents. So in China, we're seeing the same pattern we just saw with Gemini and OpenJarvis in the West. Open, local, hacky agents on one side, big platform players swooping in with hosted, polished, but more controlled versions on the other. And as that CEO story shows, the stakes for safety and privacy are very real. Now, let's talk about AI being used not to strip away safety, but to enhance it, especially for accessibility. Story number 7. GitHub uses AI to turn accessibility feedback into continuous improvement. This story comes from the GitHub blog, published March 12, 2026. GitHub explains how it's using AI to automate triage for accessibility feedback. In other words, they get tons of reports from users about accessibility issues, things like screen reader problems, keyboard navigation issues, contrast problems, and so on. Traditionally, that feedback can pile up in a chaotic backlog. GitHub is now using AI built on the same tech behind Copilot to automatically categorize, prioritize, and route that feedback. The system helps identify patterns, cluster similar problems, and get them quickly to the right teams so engineers can focus on actually fixing barriers rather than just sorting through reports. They describe this as continuous AI for accessibility, using AI not as a one-off audit tool, but as an ongoing real-time assistant that keeps the product inclusive as it evolves. So in the same week, we see AI agents accidentally deleting files and governments trying to override safety guardrails. We also see AI being used internally to make software more accessible and inclusive. Same technology, very different values and outcomes depending on how it's deployed. Next, let's jump back to Google, because the business model question is looming over all of this. Story number 8. Google is not ruling out ads in Gemini. This news comes from Wired's Artificial Intelligence section and was published on March 12, 2026. Wired interviewed Nick Fox, Google's Senior VP of Knowledge and Information, about how AI is reshaping Google's advertising business. The key takeaway: Google is not ruling out ads inside Gemini. That means when you ask Gemini a question, especially things that have historically been search queries, there could eventually be sponsored content woven into the experience. Maybe clearly labeled, maybe context-aware, but ads nonetheless. This is a big shift. Traditional search shows you a page of links with ads around them. An AI assistant gives you a single conversational answer. How do you monetize that without undermining trust? Fox talks about how Google is experimenting with new ad formats and trying to figure out where sponsored content fits in an AI-native interface. It's the classic tension. Free, powerful AI for users, but funded by advertising that might influence what you see or how it's presented. So now we've got 3 layers of power to keep in mind. Governments, as in the Pentagon versus Anthropic, platforms like Google and Baidu, deciding what gets automated and how it's monetized, and open or local projects like OpenJarvis and OpenClaw, trying to give users more control. Let's close out the news with a very human application, dating. Story number 9. Bumble adds an AI dating assistant called Bee. This news comes from Engadget Tech News and was released on March 12, 2026, citing reporting from Bloomberg. Bumble is testing an AI assistant named Bee that's designed to get you on actual dates without you swiping endlessly. Here's how it works, according to Engadget. When you opt into a new experience called Dates, Bee conducts an onboarding chat with you. It asks about your values, relationship goals, communication style, lifestyle, and dating intentions. Basically, it builds a nuanced profile that goes beyond just what you typed into your bio. Then Bee looks for other users who share some or all of those traits. When it finds a potentially strong match, it notifies both people in the app and generates a summary explaining why you might be a great fit. From there, it's up to you to start chatting and see if it leads to a real-world date. Bumble has bigger plans too. They are exploring using Bee to collect anonymous feedback about previous matches, to suggest date ideas, and to move away from the simple binary swipe into more chapter-based profiles, storytelling style profiles that capture different aspects of your life. Bumble is testing Bee internally and plans to launch it and the dates feature in beta soon. And Bumble isn't alone. Engadget knows that Tinder is already using AI to recommend your best profile photos and has a feature called Chemistry that uses personal questions and even your camera roll to make smarter matches. Grindr, with its Edge subscription, offers AI summaries of past chats and compatibility stats for new matches. We don't yet know if AI will actually make dating better, but if it increases engagement or subscriptions, these companies are going to keep pushing it. And that brings us back to the big picture. Across all these stories, there's a clear through line. AI is no longer just a cool demo. It's infrastructure for power, money, and intimacy. In the Pentagon versus Anthropic story, covered by dev community, Derivinate, and further explored on Wired's Uncanny Valley podcast, AI becomes a battlefield over who controls weapons, surveillance, and safety norms. In Anthropic's Claude visual update from The Verge, and in Google's Gemini task automation also reported by The Verge, AI becomes a richer, more embodied assistant, drawing diagrams for you and literally tapping your screen to get things done. In Stanford's OpenJarvis via MarkTech Post, and China's OpenClaw and Baidu's DuClaw via Unwire HK, we see the split between local-first open agents and cloud-hosted commercial ecosystems with very real privacy and security risks when people don't fully understand what these lobster agents can do. On GitHub's blog, we see AI used internally to make products more accessible, turning chaotic feedback into continuous inclusion work, a quiet but powerful example of AI as a force for good design. Wired's interview with Google's Nick Fox reminds us that none of this is free. Ads are likely coming to AI assistants like Gemini, raising questions about trust and incentives when your helper is also an ad channel. And Engadget's coverage of Bumble's Bee, plus similar moves from Tinder and Grindr, shows AI stepping into one of the most personal areas of our lives: who we date, how we match, and how long we stay inside these apps. If you want to read more, check out the dev community Derivinate article on the Pentagon versus Anthropic, The Verge's AI coverage on Claude's visuals and Gemini automation, MarkTech Post's write-up on Stanford's OpenJarvis, Unwire, HK's reporting on OpenClaw and Baidu's DuClaw, the GitHub blog's piece on Continuous AI for Accessibility, Wired's AI section for the Nick Fox interview and the Uncanny Valley episode, and Engadget's article on Bumble's Bee Assistant. AI is rapidly moving from what can it say to what can it do, who controls it, and what values does it serve. Over the next few months, expect more stories exactly at those intersections. Government versus labs, open versus closed, convenience versus control. If you enjoy this roundup and want to stay on top of the latest in AI, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss future episodes, and let me know in the comments which of these stories do you think is the most important. Is it the Pentagon versus Anthropic, Gemini controlling your phone, local agents like OpenJarvis, or AI picking your next date? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next AI news update.